Hi there. This is Dr. Amy Chai, and I'm coming to you today with episode 2 of my video series about what happened to America. And today we're going to be talking a little bit about fixing our political system. And I've entitled this talk Reforming Party Politics. Okay, so we're going to talk about how we can reform party politics because I'm pretty sure all of you can agree that our party politics have gotten pretty toxic and they're definitely in need of some reform. Okay, so let's go forward. I'm going to give you a little bit of an idea of what I'm going to talk about and about, what you can do, okay, to make this happen for real. Okay. The first thing I want to talk about is that we need to stop living in the past because we're living for the future now. The second thing is that there are three questions that are not being asked, and we have to address the elephant in the room by addressing those three questions. And then the third thing we need to talk about is how to create consensus in a diverse society where there, frankly, is not a lot of trust. There's not a lot of trust in our institutions. There's not a lot of trust in our political parties. And there's not a lot of trust in one another. And that needs to change. I think that a lot of us have gotten complacent. A lot of us have failed to realize that America is a government of, by, and for the people. And what that means to me is that I'm obliged to do something myself, and so are you. And that's what I'm trying to do. And I'm trying to give you a little bit of an idea about what you can do to help solve the problem, the dysfunction within our political parties. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to bring up a little slide here and just for a minute. And what I want you to learn from this slide is that we used to look at the world in terms of Republican and Democrat. One is conservative, the other one is liberal. And those would be like fighting each other over how best to manage and how best to serve America, how to bring America forward into its most prosperous version of itself. So maybe the liberals are a little bit more like mom, right? A little bit more lenient. And maybe the conservatives are a little bit more like dad, maybe a little bit more strict. And in the middle is the marriage counselor, the centrists, and the moderates. And they would sort of get together and everybody would just talk it out and we'd come to some sort of a compromise. Back in the 70s and before that, Republicans and Democrats only voted party line about 60% of the time. And now Republicans and Democrats vote party line almost 100% of the time. So, what we see is that we really have no communication. We really have no ability to compromise to work things for the betterment of our nation. But more importantly, though, and we're going to get to that in a minute, more importantly than that is that conservative and liberal really doesn't mean anything anymore. So in the past, we had both groups that just had a different way of looking at things, just had a different way of approaching a solution to a problem to make America better for everyone. But the problem that we're not addressing right now is that that's not the goal anymore. The goal is not to serve America. The goal is not to make America a better place. It's to serve the donor class. It's to serve the parties. It's to serve NGOs and nonprofit groups. It's to serve different ideologies. And it's not really about making America a place where everyone's lives are just a little bit better. So that's a problem. That's a real problem. And we have to address that. That there are forces at play that don't have the interests of the voters in mind and don't have the interests of even America herself in mind either. So we have an aging leadership, we have extreme elderly politicians and probably political operatives too, who are thinking 1970, 1980, even 1990, and how people need to be fed a little soundbite and then we'll work together and something will miraculously happen. Those ways are gone. The liberal, conservative, moderate paradigm is gone. And that brings me to why we have to stop living in the past and start living for the future. A future where we know we have different problems that we need to address. We have different ways that people approach their political lives. We have different population makeup. We have no longer any kind of homogeneity in the way we think or believe. And we need to address that. So, how are we going to do that? How do we stop living in the past? I think that we need to ask 3 questions. So, the 3 questions that we need to ask, let's talk about the first question. And this question is really the elephant in the room. The first question is, should the United States of America continue to exist as a sovereign nation? I say that it should, but there are very powerful forces and very powerful groups that don't want America to continue to exist as a sovereign nation because they want a global structure of politics. They want global rule of unelected oligarchs who think that they know best for you and for me. And if there's one danger, the person who is going to traumatize you the most is the person who thinks that they're working for your best interests when actually they're harming you, because perhaps their utopia is my dystopia. But who are the groups of people who don't really want America to exist? I'll tell you, there are 3. The first group of people that does not want America to exist is the global corporate elite who view human beings as a commodity. We have the law of supply and demand. And when you have more supply, then the prices go down. And that's why economists say that with open borders, businesses can have double the amount of productivity at about a 10% lower cost. This is a huge boon for people who earn a lot of money from the labor of others. So that's the first group of people who want open borders. They want that for their own financial interests, and also because they do think that they are benevolent. They do think that they know what's best for you and for me, whether we like it or not. And they think they need to educate us by forcing us to comply with their agenda for a borderless North America. And this isn't a conspiracy because you can just watch them talk about it on the internet, which I did. The second group of people is the global equity socialists. Now, the global equity socialists, they want to make sure that workers in poor countries share the wealth of workers in wealthy countries. And so if you have open borders, yes, American labor will have about a 7.5% decrease in the amount of wages that they get, according to economists. However, people coming from third world countries can have as much as 157% increase in their salaries. So, what this is doing is spreading the wealth globally. So, there'll be global equity for workers united around the world. But these global equity people have not thought this through, because how is it going to be helpful to workers to do the bidding of the global elite who are commodifying human beings? I think that they may be something we used to call useful idiots, to be honest, because everyone's wages will be depressed here, at least in the United States, and people will be used by the global elite uh, for production. That's all. And the third group, unfortunately, is religious groups, NGOs, and nonprofits that it's their business model. It's, I guess you could call it the immigrant industrial complex, where millions and millions and millions of dollars are funneled into these groups. So, yes, they have a very strong incentive to keep the border open. And these are the type of people who are basically the donor class and the political action class are both in favor of open borders, which would make America as a sovereign nation basically cease to exist. So North America would be a lot like the EU, and it would be a lot less like America. And a lot of people see that as a good thing. I do not see that as a good thing. So that's the first question. Should America continue to exist? What do you think? The second question is, should American government serve American interests, or should they serve primarily foreign interests? Now, we're printing a lot of money and we don't always know where it's going or why we're sending it there. But there's a lot of foreign money that goes out. We're funding both sides of every war, it seems, around the globe. And is that really the right thing for us to do? Should we be arms dealers? Should we meddle in other people's business? Should we support other countries? Or should we primarily use that money to make life better for Americans who live in America, to solve homelessness, to solve poverty, to improve our infrastructure, to make ourselves healthy and happy? And then, with what we have left over after we're more healthy, we can certainly donate. I don't want to be stingy to other countries, but should American government serve American interests first? Yes or no? So that's the second question. The third question is, should elected officials serve all constituents or just a few constituents? I know if you're like me, you've never been represented in your entire life because, if you live in a state which is a trifecta state, which basically has all one party and there's gerrymandering and the party's in power for like 50 years and the other party never wins, you never have any representation at all, and then the party in power just wants to shove their ideology down your throat. And that happens in Republican and Democrat run states, because it's winner take all. It's not proportional representation. But if you're a representative, you should be representing all of your constituents instead of demeaning them and being happy when they're miserable. I think that's just terrible. And I think that that's wrong. So, the three questions that I would like to see asked up front as we're trying to reform our political parties is number one, the elephant in the room: should America continue to exist as a sovereign nation with secure borders instead of a federation of North America of some sort? My answer is yes, Americans should continue to exist. Number two, should American government serve America first or foreign countries first? I'm going to say it should serve America first. Number three, should elected officials serve all constituents or just a few constituents? I'm going to say our elected officials should serve all constituents. And these are questions up front as we reform the structure of our parties for the future. So, with question number three, I mean, we know, and we saw in video number one that I put out last week, we saw that, frankly, our constituents aren't representing anyone other than their donors. So that's a huge problem too. But I'm not even going to go there right now. I'm just going to say, go ahead and watch video number one. But these are the three key issues that we need to address in both parties and any third party as we go forward, and make it clear, make it plain. Don't dissemble, don't lie, don't gaslight. Be honest, be truthful. We want this because this, and let people choose what they want. And if they don't want that, just say it. Say what you want and what you don't want. It's really that simple. So, are we willing? Are we willing to make space for people in America? Are we willing to make space for people who disagree with us on fundamental issues? And realistically, our political parties have become very extreme in their views, and most people aren't, aren't well represented even in their own party if they are Republican or Democrat. But imagine that you're a third party or independent. Most of us are feeling pretty homeless right now. So if you want to build a great party, a really wonderful party that people feel good about joining, it should be a party that has a really big tent. It has room for all of us. It has room for people who are very different from one another because it's built on trust and transparency. And the tent would have to include different demographic groups like the Greens, the Republicans, the Democrats, Blacks, whites, Hispanics, Asians, all different people groups. It would, and libertarians, independents. It has to be big enough for everyone. So how are we going to do that? And that's maybe not as easy as you think it is. So the way I think to do it is with transparency. And what do I mean by that? I think that we need to be transparent with every piece of legislation that we put out there, with every piece, with every plank on the platform, be it Republican, Democrat, third party. We need to be very transparent about what the final goal is for each platform piece, and it has to be specific. So a party that's good would have something that everyone could feel good about. And for example, using transparency, being honest about what we want and honest about how we're going to get there, as well as radical transparency with funds and conflicts of interest, I think will enable all of us with differing views to have much, much better ability to find common ground. For example, something that the GOP is strongly in favor of would be free speech, the Bill of Rights, and also decentralization of power more in the states. So a lot of the things the GOP is interested in revolve around the first 10 amendments of the Constitution and how we interpret those. Um, I personally am all in for free speech, and I'm also all in for decentralization, because oftentimes a top down approach, if you've ever worked at a business that is very top down, it's a very vertical arrangement of power structure. There's always a problem, and they never listen to the people at the bottom. But when you have a more horizontal power structure in a company, everything is far less toxic. So decentralization through the 10th Amendment as much as possible is very important. And that's where removing some of the executive branch staffing is going to help a lot, because they use money to manipulate people to do what they want federally. And that's not good. So we would stop that. And then for free speech, I think really all of us believe in free speech. And if we don't, we probably should think twice. I mean, I remember when I was a kid hearing about Skokie, I was furious. I was like, how is it possible that they would allow Nazis to actually march in a Jewish neighborhood? That must be stopped. And that was when my mother told me about free speech and how, if you don't let all voices be heard, then you won't understand what people are thinking. It actually causes more problems than it prevents. And so, no matter how offensive someone is, we shouldn't suppress speech. So that would be something that you could give for the GOP. Now, in your party, you might find something else that you would like to give for the GOP. But if I were designing a party, I would provide the GOP with free speech and decentralization. And then what would I provide for the Democrats if it were my party? I would provide money for real infrastructure. And again, here we're talking transparency, because it wouldn't be the cronies. It wouldn't be the cronies or the investors that are doing, insider trading, or, Bubba's cousin who has an infrastructure company. It would be completely transparent of who gets the contracts and how much money is spent. So to create infrastructure that we need, roads, I would particularly focus on things like transportation and railroads, and also the grid, to really shore up our aging infrastructure. That would be something that the Democrats would like. The other thing I would do in my party with transparency is to provide effective social support for people who are in areas of concentrated poverty. And unfortunately, a lot of what that means, or fortunately, it would mean removing existing structures of deep corruption in inner cities, because political corruption is the number one cause of concentrated poverty. And that's why we see concentrated poverty in so many of these cities. But the money would get to the people if everything was really transparent, wouldn't it, though? It would, I think. We would know where every dollar goes. We would see where every dollar goes. We would have conflicts of interest revealed. It would be radically transparent. And then we would be able to use data. We would be able to use evidence to come up with what works to solve things like addiction and homelessness and the school to prison pipeline. So that would be for the Democrats. And ultimately, it would save so much money, because being transparent means we have much less corruption. What about the Greens? Okay. What would transparency mean for the Greens? And we all know the Greens' favorite thing is making sure that the environment is safe and healthy for everyone. And I certainly agree with that. I think all of us do. And I think a lot of the reason there's opposition to the like Green New Deal is because most of what passes for actual green policy is just greenwashing. It's greenwashing cronies getting greenwashed dollars. And there's no data, there's no efficacy data. And it doesn't solve the problem. It just shovels cash into someone's pockets. Do you really want to solve environmental problems, or do you want to pay cash to Bubba's cousin who has an environmental solar panel company like Solindra? That was $500 million that was flushed down the toilet because of, you know, no transparency. No transparency. But we could certainly create real solutions with real data and real outcomes that would not make poor people suffer, not force people to do things that they don't want to do, and not take billions and billions of dollars that are wasted. And we could still do a great job with the environment without having a top down, overly expensive behemoth of corruption for the environment, which is exactly what we have now. We want to decentralize the environment. We want to, support it with radical transparency and let the people invest in the environment. Let the people decide what their region needs, not something from the top down, but something that we can all participate in. And then nobody would be against it, right? And how about the Black community? I think the Black community has suffered for long enough. I think our inner city schools have created a scenario where Black kids in the city are going to actually need affirmative action forever because the education is so bad. And the reason the education is so bad is because of the teachers' unions and how they are pushing their own ideology instead of pushing science, evidence, facts, reading, and math. I mean, it isn't rocket science, but you can't get to rocket science or you can't get to brain surgery until you actually know how to read and do math. And our schools are failing our Black and brown children and trapping them in concentrated poverty, which is leading to their deaths and imprisonment. And that is absolutely wrong. And that's because of a lack of transparency with how the money is being spent in the communities where a lot of Blacks end up living. And that is not fair. That is not right. And we should never have had this happen in America, but we did. Who'd have thought it? Okay. And then for libertarians, and I come from the libertarian background. For me, my platform would be let's not spend lots of money to kill people overseas all the time. I don't know, call me crazy, but I'd like to spend that money here at home or just not take the money from Americans in the first place. Maybe we wouldn't have so much debt. So now the policies that I talked about, these, I did talk about the policies that I would put in place if I were creating a way to bring everybody into one tent, into a party. And you maybe have different ways or different ideas or different things that matter to you. And I think that's where creating the parties that work for the people, that's where it comes in. But the most important thing is that we start out we stop living in the past. We realize that we're living for the future and things are not the way they used to be 50 years ago. It's not about, liberals and conservatives and moderates anymore. It's about America. Is America something that we want to see flourish or not. You know, do we want a political system that serves America first and that represents constituents like a republic might do? And so that's the first thing we have to do. And then these things are very important after we decide those. And you may want a party that doesn't want America to exist as a sovereign nation. You may want open borders. And that's fine if that's what you want. Just be honest about it. Just be honest about it. Be transparent so that people know what they're voting for. It's not fair, it's not right to lie to people, to gaslight people. No. Okay? So those are the things we need to do. And then I probably spent a little too long on telling you about my issues that I would put in there if I had my own party. The kind of way that I would bring people under the tent by taking issues that everyone cares about and bringing them in under the umbrella of transparency. And that's how we cultivate trust. And that's how we work towards a common goal without all the rhetoric, without all the lies, without all the gaslighting. And this is all the time I have right now for this particular video. And so next time, I would like to talk about wedge issues and how to solve them. Believe it or not, we can solve wedge issues. And so I hope that you'll join me in trying to reform whatever political party you are in by asking the important questions and pushing hard for transparency, radical transparency that will build trust for all of us. So thank you so much for watching, and I hope you'll come back next time.